You're watching HuffPost Live. I'm Nancy Red. In the endless debate over public schools, now we typically rush to the conclusion that private schools are better. Because many people who have a dog in this fight actually set out to debunk one or the other. They set out to say, well, private school is better or public school is better. This wasn't your intention at all.
Right. No, it wasn't. I was sort of minding my own business, looking at math instruction and achievement, because that's what I typically study. And I was including private school as a variable in this analysis I was doing, because typically school type will relate to the type of instruction and the type of achievement that's happening in those schools. And I was very surprised to see the reverse of what I expected, which is a negative estimate for the private school effect.
A couple of generations ago, people sent their kids to private schools because they had a religious component that the families wanted to pursue, not necessarily because they were thought to be better. But in the 1980s and 1990s, there started to be quite a bit of research on this. And we knew that private school students were scoring higher than public school students. But researchers wanted to know, well, is that true once you compare apples to apples and take into account the demographic characteristics of the different schools and students? And what they found was actually there's a private school effect in the 1980s and 1990s. So that's why our finding, I think, is quite interesting, because there's been a lot of policy built on those old assumptions about a private school effect. Things like charter schools and vouchers proceed with the assumption that private style organizations lead to better outcomes. And our findings are suggesting that's not true.
For one, we need to discuss what does it mean when we talk about better, which is better, and what's our criteria for what it means to be successful in schools and how we measure that. Are we talking purely about grades, standardized test results, college or job readiness, socialization? All these things need to be factored in. But then we also need to be aware that for a lot of people, public versus private isn't even a choice. It's an incredibly privileged choice and one that I'm incredibly aware of. I went to a private school up until 8th grade growing up. I went to public high school. I taught for many years as a public high school social studies teacher, and now my son is in a private day school. But we live in an area where the public schools are amazing, and there's a plethora of private schools as well.
The part of it that is most compelling for me, since I'm in and out of lots of different kinds of classrooms, public, private, charter, and religious, that there's really, when you have a choice about where to send your child, it's about goodness of fit in terms of how the child fits into the teaching approaches in the particular schools that are available to you.
You need to have an idea of what your purpose of education is. If your purpose of education is to get into college and have the highest paying job that you want out of college, then there's some really obvious reasons why private school and the elitist society that it connects you to is the obvious route. But if your purpose is more, if something else, or more about creating a citizen who's going to contribute to the democracy of our society, then maybe that's not as much of a priority, this conversation about private versus public.